Today's lesson is not for the faint of heart. Today's lesson is not for anyone who is lacking in courage. Today's lesson will shatter any illusions, will shatter any sense of limitation, will shatter any relationship to the identity of victimhood. Today's lesson is all about revealing the truth about how each of our individual realities are created and what each one of us can do to change our reality, should we choose to do so. Changing reality requires a profound acceptance of personal responsibility. A profound acceptance of personal responsibility. A level of personal responsibility that transcends the desire to shrink in any way from the assumption that I am the cause of all that I experience in my reality. We are continuing today with Neville's Lesson 4, titled No One to Change But Self. Now, this is a secret, a sacred secret, and one that has been historically shunned by the masses, because there are many human beings historically who have shied away from assuming this level of responsibility for the creation of one's own personal reality. Throughout ancient history, the mystics have told us over and over again that all that we perceive that appears to be external to us and the world around us is really, truthfully, the contents of our own consciousness put on display. That each one of us contains a spark of the divine, a light within that is projecting outwards through the filters of our assumptions, the filters of our judgments, the filters of our self-concept, of our illusion of human identity. And that this beautiful liquid reality, plastic-like substance of reality that we seem to be living in the 3D, its only job, its only purpose is to reflect back to us that which we believe is true about ourselves. And what we believe is true about ourselves also includes what is true about the world, because the world is ourself, pushed out to experience. And the ancient mystics have told us this time and time again. And for many of us, historically, we haven't been ready to hear it. We just quite simply haven't been ready to separate ourselves from the illusion of limitation and to really assume the full weight of responsibility that comes along with choosing to create our reality in alignment with what we do want, with an upgraded self-concept. Now, this process of deciding whether or not to assume this level of personal responsibility is dramatized in the ancient scriptures, because each and every human being born of woman on planet Earth experiences this great quandary, this great question: am I the cause? Am I willing to assume responsibility for being the cause? Who am I really? Every human being in time will ask these questions. And the scriptures were written by the ancient mystics seeking to pass down to every human being who eventually would ask these questions some sort of revelation, some sort of insight to help us not only see the truth of the cause of the phenomena of life, as Neville says, the truth about what really drives this reality that we are experiencing. What is the cause of it? Is it really just chaos? Is it really just random? Is it really just, we just do our best and then the world's going to do whatever the world's going to do? Are we at the whims of some mechanistic source that is outside of us? Or are we in truth experiencing our assumptions, experiencing our self-concept? Are we in truth the potter, molding the clay, this plastic-like substance of the reality in which we appear to be living? Now, as I said in the beginning, this is not a lesson for the faint of heart. It requires profound courage to be willing to remove polarized thinking, to release judgment of the world you are living in, release judgment of self, to realize there truthfully is no other, not in the way that the illusion would appear to tell us that there is. There really is no one outside of us to change. There really is only one to change, and that is self. And that is, of course, the title of this lesson 4, Neville Goddard's 4th mystery school lesson. There is no one to change but self. Now, this is part 2 of this lesson, and I find at the beginning of Sunday Mystery School, when we're starting a lesson partway through, it's important to look back so that we may move ahead with wisdom. And that's kind of what this introduction is intended to do. It's intended to really help us align with this sense, this feeling, this energy that is really being conveyed through this lesson, even though we're kind of picking up partway through. So looking back, last week, Neville was really introducing this idea of there's really no one to change but self. And he was talking about this conversation that fourth dimensional thinking, or enlightened reason, or the Christ mind within each human being asks of the disciplined qualities of mind, which are dramatized in the scriptures as the disciples. It's a conversation on the surface level between Jesus and the disciples, but we understand that this is a conversation between the higher mind in each human being and the lower mind, or the human identity. And this Christ mind asks, who do men say that I am? Or what do other people think about me? And of course, the disciplined states of mind, the disciples, they're animated in this Bible story, say, some people, some other human beings think that you are the reincarnation of some great prophet, or some great man or woman of the past, right? And then this fourth dimensional mind says, okay, well, truthfully, I'm not really concerned about what other people think of me. Being fourth dimensional thinking, or higher dimensional reasoning, or the mind of Christ, really there's only one question that I must ask of myself. And that is, who am I? Who am I? And Peter, and we'll learn more about what Peter represents in today's lesson, Peter answers, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus, fourth dimensional mind, higher dimensional reasoning, says, flesh and blood could not have revealed this to you, but only my Father who is in heaven. And I say to you, you Peter, which is this acceptance of being the cause of reality, you Peter are the rock upon which I will build my living church. And of course, that living church is a dramatization of life itself. I will build my self-concept upon this realization of authorship. I will build my mansion that I dwell in, right? Because if you can create anything, like, what are you going to create for yourself? You're going to create a life of greatness. You can create a life of beauty. I'm going to build this estate upon this fundamental self-realization, the only question that really I can ask that matters, and that's, who do I believe that I am? And I'm going to choose to believe that I am an incarnation of the mind of Christ, that I am more than flesh and blood. I am more than the 3D illusion of identity, that I am in truth the cause of the world in which I am living. And so, having had this revealed to me, not by someone else, no one else can tell me that this is true. And I know that in this moment, you're listening to me on a live stream telling you this story. And this story is a conveyance of the truth, but the story alone cannot convince you that this is true. Only you yourself can go within to your own mind and ask the Christ mind in you, who am I? More than what flesh and blood can tell me, meaning more than the opinions of others, more than the opinions of any teacher, any leader, any person that you look up to as potentially a source of inspiration, more than anything on the outside. Who do I believe that I am? And this is the most important question that we can ask ourselves, because how we answer this question will determine everything else about our lives. And this is the truth that sets us free, because I spoke earlier of this responsibility of being the cause as a weight. And that's usually how it hits at first. It's like, wait a second. You mean to tell me that everything that I think is happening in the world, everything that appears to be happening in my life is a product of my own consciousness, and that I can change it at any time? But so far, perhaps I've chosen not to, and so I have lived with perhaps something that I didn't want to live with, or I have experienced situations that maybe I would have chosen differently had I known, right? These are all the things that can be stirred up upon this realization of being the cause. Okay, so at first it hits like a weight. It's like, whoa, this is a lot, potentially a lot to swallow, a lot to accept. And it hits like a weight. Again, not for the faint of heart. The faint of heart, turn it off and say, too much, probably not real, probably not true. I'm not ready. Let me continue to hold to my false beliefs. This is, the crazy man hitting himself over the head with the facts of life, pleading with Jesus, enlightened reason, please don't heal me. I prefer the comfort of my gravestones. Okay, that's, the ancients knew that every human goes through this. At first it hits hard and you're like, whoa, that's a lot. So at first it might feel like a weight. But if you really sit in it, if you really sit in it and you really ask the question, what if it were true? What if I am the cause of my world? What if I can choose to change myself? And what if everything about my world would change as a result of that inner change in me? What if I have that kind of power? What if I have that kind of freedom? What if I have that joyful responsibility? And sitting in the silence with that, there is something that starts to unlock. And that weight falls off like chains that are severed and cut. And we feel the bindings fall away. And we understand that no more can we be contained. No more can we be the victim of the external circumstance. No more can anyone or anything or any idea or any concept or any circumstance or any situation enslave us. We can set ourselves free by choosing to be the cause and choosing to be free. And that, my friends, is when the seed of joy begins to sprout. Because that is when we begin to realize how beautiful an experience here on planet Earth truly can be. How beautiful and meaningful of a life we can choose to live when we understand that all that we experience springs from within. And we can choose to adopt the Christ mind and transcend judgment and choose eyes that focus on beauty, as we will discuss more in this lesson. There is a rising on the spiral. There is a rising in consciousness that occurs when this revolution and revelation, it's both, right? The revelation creates the revolution, is unlocked within each of us. And this live stream can't do it for you, but it can inspire the question within your own awareness. And that is the purpose that it serves, to inspire the courage to ask the question. We're going to continue now with Neville's words, but before we do, I'm going to take this beautiful opportunity to speak a blessing over everyone who is gathered here, blessing over the entire world, blessing over self-pushed out, that one thing that we all are. I invite you to join me now as we go into the silence, and I will speak a few words of blessings. I turn now to go within, drawing my senses inward into the center of my own being. I offer gratitude and appreciation in this moment for the perfection that is this present moment. In gratitude, we accept that we are, and we speak out and declare that we are wise souls, growing healthy, youthful minds. Thank you that we are now feeling the presence of life force energy, awakening, enlivening, healing, and making whole our bodies in the physical dimension. Thank you that our relationships are now healed with love, compassion, and understanding. Thank you that we have humbly accepted our power and our responsibility to imagine wisely as sovereign co-creators of this world we share. Thank you that we are inspired by life-expanding, consciousness-uplifting possibilities manifesting now. We honor the ancestors who have walked this path ahead of us, and we recognize that we too are the ancestors. Thank you for the wisdom passed down from the ancients, woven into the fabric of reality all around us, in the spirit of liberating our hearts and our minds. Thank you that together we welcome the inheritance of our bright and beautiful future. And so it is. Okay. We're going to continue now with the text. This is lesson 4, part 2, no one to change but self. Neville says, if you are disturbed and you would like to be something other, if you would like me to be something other than what I appear to be, then you must decide that which you want me to be. Now, this goes for anything in your world. If you are disturbed, so there's something happening and you're like, you know what, I kind of wish that that was different than how it appears to be right now. Neville's saying, if that's the case for you, then the only thing you can do is to become in yourself what you want the world to reflect back to you. Okay, so this goes for any relationship and go for any circumstance, situation, person, place, or thing. But let's use the example of a person. Okay, so there's a person and you're seeing their behavior and you're like, if it were up to me, I would choose for that person to just behave a little bit differently. Okay? The only thing that we can do, according to Neville and all sacred, ancient, mystic wisdom, is to become in ourselves, in our own awareness, that quality which we would like that person to reflect back to us. Neville says, we must become the thing that we want others to be, or we will never see them be it. A wise mystic once said, if there is something that you feel you are lacking in your world, look at what you are giving, because you will get what you give. So, if there's something that you feel like you're not getting, chances are you aren't giving it. So give outwardly what you would like to receive back. It's a mirror. It's a mirror. You give out what you would like to have reflected back. Your consciousness, my consciousness, is the only true foundation in the world, the foundation upon which everything else is built. Consciousness. It's a consciousness first model of reality. Matter is an artifact and phenomena of consciousness. Energy, an artifact and phenomena of consciousness. Consciousness is the only reality. Everything that appears to exist exists in consciousness. This is what is called Peter in the Bible. Peter is that foundation of consciousness. Peter in the Bible is not a man. Peter is a faithfulness that cannot turn to anyone on the outside. Peter is a faithfulness that cannot be flattered when you are told by someone else that you are St. John, come again, or any other great person. It can be very flattering to be told that you are John the Baptist, come again, or a great prophet, or Jeremiah. But then, I deafen my ears to this flattering little bit of news that men would give me, and I ask myself, but honestly, who am I? Honestly, who am I? If I can deny the limitations of my birth, if I can deny my environment and the belief that I am but an extension of my family tree, and feel within myself that I am Christ, and sustain this assumption until it takes a central place and forms the habitual center of my energy, I will do the works attributed to Jesus. We're going to say that again. If I can deny the limitations of my birth. Okay, so my birth came with some perceived limitations, right? It's like, oh, you are Joe, born of parents, right? Like you are, whatever your name is, born of human parents into whatever family. And if you assume that that is your identity, oh, I'm just a human being living a human life and I came from human parents, then that is a limitation. If you are born into poverty or into a specific, family way of being, and you accept that as just the limitation of what you're going to experience in this lifetime, that's a limitation. However, if you can deny those limitations, if you can deny the limitations of your birth, of your environment, of this belief that, hey, I'm just another member of my family, I'm just, part of this endless family tree. If I can deny that human circumstance of my consciousness and feel within myself that I am higher dimensional awareness, that I am the Christ mind, inhabiting a human 3D body. And if I can sustain this assumption until it becomes the primary place where my beingness lives, when it becomes the habitual center of my energy. That's how Neville says it. The habitual center of my energy. Now, this can be a bit of a reprogramming because historically, if we've been not aware of this, our habitual center of our energy can be to assume that whatever happens on the outside is on the outside and affecting us. But to move in consciousness to a higher dimensional habitual center of energy takes profound responsibility as a habit. So it's that first nature is to say, oh, whatever's happening out there is within me, as opposed to, oh, I'm a victim of circumstances, right? So it's like there's two centers. Either you're living in the 3D and everything appears to be happening to, or you're in the 4D and everything is within. So you have to move, you have to choose to move, choose to ascend to this higher dimensional embodiment of authorship. And when it becomes the habitual center of energy, Neville says, I will do the works that are dramatized in the scriptures as being the works of Jesus. Because Jesus represents that state of God or higher dimensional thinking raised to the level of full expression in a human being. I and my Father are one, but my Father is greater than I. I am in the 3D, I'm in a physical human body, but my Father is consciousness. And I know that I am consciousness inhabiting this physical body. And so when I make this the habitual center of my energy, I become as the character that is dramatized in Scripture as Jesus Christ. Without thought or effort, I will mold a world in harmony with that perfection that I have assumed and feel springing within me. When I open the eyes of the blind, when I unstop the ears of the deaf, when I give joy for mourning and beauty for ashes, then and only then have I truly established this vine deep within. Remember, Jesus said, I am the vine. I am consciousness. You all, everything that I perceive in the world outside of me is branches from the vine that I am. So if I desire to change the fruit of the branches, I change the vine that I am, and the fruit changes. It's a mirror. Neville says that is what I would automatically do if I were truly conscious of being Christ. It is said of this presence, he proved that he was Christ by his works. Our ordinary alterations of consciousness, as we pass from one state to another, they're not true transformations. They're alterations, but they're not true transformations because each of them is so rapidly succeeded by another in the reverse direction. Now, what does that mean? What Neville is saying is that as we're moving throughout our 3D reality, and we see something and we adjust, and then adjust back, and then adjust, and then adjust back. These are just little alterations. They're not transformations. And this is the key. This is the secret of all secrets. This is the key right here, this sentence. Whenever our assumption grows so stable as to definitely expel its rivals, then that central habitual concept defines our character, and it is a true transformation. I'm going to say that again because that's the secret. Whenever our assumption of who we are, whoever we desire to be, whenever our assumption that we are who we desire to be grows so stable that it definitely expels its rivals, all other ideas are crowded out of consciousness because this one idea has so centrally dominated my habitual state of being. That central habitual concept that has dominated my state of being defines our character and is a true transformation. Neville gives an example of this. He says Jesus, which is enlightened reason or higher dimensional awareness, saw nothing unclean in the woman taken in adultery. He said to her, "Hath no man condemned thee?" It's from John 8:10. And she said, "No man, Lord." And Jesus said unto her, "Neither do I condemn thee. Go and sin no more." Go and sin no more. Well, to sin is to miss the mark. And if you think about the concept of a woman taken in adultery, what that is illuminating is this idea of changing concepts of self, not remaining faithful to one central idea. Okay? So enlightened reason doesn't condemn that. Enlightened reason says, I don't condemn that. I'm just telling you to go and sin no more, meaning to go and choose that one single habitual self-concept that you will remain fully faithful to. That's the message that is being conveyed in that story. And in Neville's words, he says, no matter what is brought before the presence of beauty, beauty only sees beauty. Jesus was so completely identified with the lovely that he was incapable of seeing the unlovely. When you and I really become conscious of being this higher dimensional awareness, having a human experience, when we really become conscious of being Christ, of having the Christ mind in its fullness within each of us, we too will straighten the arms of the withered. We will resurrect the dead hopes of men. We will do all the things that we could not do when we felt ourselves limited by our family tree. It is a bold step. It requires courage. It should not be taken lightly, because to do this is to die. As an example of this, in the scriptures, John, the man of 3 dimensions, is beheaded. He loses his 3-dimensional focus, that Jesus, the 4th dimensional focus, the 4th dimensional self, might live. So we sacrifice, we die to this idea that we are just simply offspring of a limited human family tree. We die to that concept, that the new concept, that we are the embodiment of higher dimensional reasoning, higher dimensional focus, higher dimensional awareness. We allow that to become the habitual center of our being. Neville says this so beautifully. His entire speech here is poetry. Listen to what he says. Any enlargement of our concept of self involves a somewhat painful parting with strongly rooted hereditary conceptions. The ligaments are strong that hold us in the womb of conventional limitations. All that you formerly believed, you no longer believe. You know that there is no power outside of your own consciousness. Therefore, you cannot turn to anyone outside of self. You have no ears for the suggestion that something else has power in it. You know the only reality is God, and that God is your own consciousness. There is no other God. Therefore, on this rock, you build the everlasting church. You boldly assume that you are this divine being, self-begotten, because you dared to appropriate that which was not given to you in your cradle, a concept of self that was not formed in your mother's womb, a concept of self conceived entirely outside of the offices of man. This story is beautifully told us in the Bible using the two sons of Abraham. One, the blessed Isaac, born outside of the offices of man, and the other, Ishmael, born in bondage. If you remember this Bible story, Sarah, the wife of Abraham, was too old to have a child. So her husband Abraham went in unto the bondservant Hagar, the pilgrim. And she conceived of the old man and bore him a son called Ishmael. Ishmael's hand was against every man, and every man's hand against him. Every child born of woman is born into bondage, born into all that his environment represents, regardless of whether it be the throne of England, the White House, or any great place in the world. Every child born of woman is personified as Ishmael, the child of Hagar, born into bondage. But asleep in every child is the blessed Isaac, who is born outside of the offices of man. Because remember, this revelation cannot be told to you by another human being. We can speak of it, but it can't truly be revealed by anyone outside of yourself. Only you can go into the silence of your own being and know this to be true for yourself. And this is why it is this idea of this second son who is born outside of the offices of man. This is the second birth, or the birth from above. It is born through faith alone. Why faith? Well, because this requires courage and it requires faith to believe that I am the cause of my reality. I have to remain faithful to that self-concept. This second child, Neville says, has no earthly father. He is self-begotten. What is this second birth? I find myself a human. I cannot go back into my mother's womb, and yet I must be born a second time. The quote from John says, "Except a man be born again, he cannot enter the kingdom of God." So we have two kingdoms. The kingdom of man, three-dimensional kingdom, this world that we appear in illusion to be living in. And we have the kingdom of God, which is this higher dimensional awareness that shapes and molds a world in harmony with this state. And the scriptures are telling us that we cannot enter that second kingdom, that kingdom of God, until we are born again, or born from above, until we buy the pearl of great price, until we assume that we are the cause of all that we behold, that all that we behold, although it appears to be without, it is truly within. And that this whole world outside of us is a projection of our consciousness. That is the second birth. When that becomes the habitual center of our awareness, that is the second birth. And that is how we enter the kingdom of God. We transcend the kingdom of man, and we enter into the kingdom of God, and we build our life in that awareness, which is the rock called Peter. I quietly appropriate that which no man can give me. No woman can give me this. I dare to assume that I am God. This must be of faith. This must be of promise. Remember, Neville, throughout his entire career, he speaks of two things, the law and the promise. The law is that my assumptions create reality because consciousness is the only reality. And the promise is that as we learn to use the law, we become aware of our central status as the author of this reality in which we are living. And as we become aware of the status of being the author, we begin to transcend the kingdom of men, and we enter the kingdom of God. And that is the fulfillment of the promise. Then Neville says, I become the blessed. I become Isaac. And I begin to do the things that only this presence could do. I know that I am born out of the limitations of Ishmael. I have become heir to the kingdom. Ishmael could not inherit anything, although his father was Abraham or God himself. Ishmael did not have both parents of the godly. His mother was Hagar, the bondwoman, and so he could not partake of his father's estate because he was limited in this dramatization to the 3D kingdom, the kingdom of earth, the world, kingdom of men. You and I are dramatized in this story as Abraham and Sarah. And contained within our own consciousness, there is one that is waiting for our recognition. In the Old Testament, it is called Isaac. And in the New Testament, the state is called Jesus. And it is born without the aid of any other human being. It's born from above. This happens on the inside, in our own, the silence and deep of our own awareness. No man can tell you that you are Christ Jesus. No man can tell you and convince you that you are God. You must toy with the idea and wonder what it would be like to be God. No clear conception of the origin of phenomena is possible, except that consciousness is all, and all is consciousness. Nothing can be evolved from man that was not potentially involved in his nature. Meaning, anything that we are observing in the world of form is rising up out of the deep of our own nature. The ideal that we serve and hope to attain could never be evolved from us were it not potentially involved in our nature. Now, that word potentially could be a little confusing there. What he's saying is that potential of anything that we would desire to be, the potential for it to be true, is in our own nature. Okay, so it's not something new that's springing into being. That potential lay dormant within our own nature. Creation is finished. All that could possibly exist does exist. Remember, we're living in a field of all realities, and we're in a little bubble in this field of all realities, which is our current reality bubble. And so there is another reality bubble where whatever we could desire already exists. And so our job as being the author is to rewrite ourselves into the reality bubble where we are the person that we desire to be. All potentials already exist, although they may be latent, meaning they may be sleeping, dormant. And it is up to us to awaken them by becoming attuned or at one with them. Let me now retell and emphasize an experience of mine printed by me 2 years ago under the title, The Search. I think it will help you to understand this law of consciousness and show you that you have no one to change but self, for you are incapable of seeing other than the contents of your own consciousness. This is a quote from Neville's pamphlet titled The Search. And there's, I think, 3 or 4 paragraphs he's reading from this pamphlet. Once, in an idle interval at sea, I meditated on the perfect state and wondered what I would be were I of too pure eyes to behold iniquity. If to me all things were pure, and were I without condemnation. As I became lost in this fiery brooding, I found myself lifted above the dark environment of the senses. So intense was the feeling, I felt myself a being of fire, dwelling in a body of air. Voices, as if from a heavenly chorus, with the exaltation of those who had been conquerors in a conflict with death, were singing, "He is risen. He is risen." And intuitively, I knew they meant me. Then I seemed to be walking in the night, I soon came upon a scene that might have been the ancient pool of Bethesda, for in this place lay a multitude of impotent folk, blind, halt, withered, waiting not for the moving of the water as of tradition, but waiting for me. As I came near, without thought or effort on my part, they were one after the other molded as by the magician of the beautiful. Eyes, hands, feet, all missing members were drawn from some invisible reservoir and molded in harmony with that perfection which I felt springing within me. When all were made perfect, the chorus exulted, "It is finished." I know this vision was the result of my intense meditation upon the idea of perfection. For my meditations invariably bring about union with the state contemplated. I had been so completely absorbed within the idea that, for a while, I had become what I contemplated. And the high purpose with which I had for that moment identified myself, drew the companionship of high things, and fashioned the vision in harmony with my inner nature. The ideal with which we are united by association of ideas awakens 1,000 moods to create a drama in keeping with the central idea. My mystical experiences have convinced me that there is no way to bring about the perfection that we seek other than by a transformation of ourselves. As soon as we succeed in transforming ourselves, the world will magically melt before our eyes and reshape itself in harmony with that which our transformation affirms. We fashion the world that surrounds us by the intensity of our imagination and feeling, and we illuminate or darken our lives by the concepts we hold of ourselves. Nothing is more important to us than our conception of ourselves. And this is especially true of our concept of the deep, dimensionally greater one within us. There's another key idea here that I have highlighted in bold in the text of this lesson. And I say that to emphasize it because this is a key idea. Those that help or hinder us, whether they know it or not, are the servants of that law which shapes outward circumstances in harmony with our inner nature. It is our conception of ourselves which frees or constrains us, though it may use material agencies to achieve its purpose. Now, Neville, as the poet, he words this so beautifully and profoundly, and we're going to go over it again to make it very, very easy to understand. People in the world, whether they know it or not, they are agents of the law that shapes our circumstances in harmony with our self-concept. Our conception of ourselves is what frees or constrains us. But that concept can use all of the actors, all of the props, all of the set pieces on the great stage of the world to animate out and reflect back to us our self-concept. So all that appears to be outside of us are agents. Everyone that you encounter is an actor who is operating under a script that is written as an offspring of the self-concept that we hold deep within ourselves. And so to change the script of another, we change the self-concept of ourselves, understanding that what we animate in the deep of ourselves becomes this great story that we live in the three-dimensional world. Because life molds the outer world to reflect the inner arrangement of our minds, there is no way of bringing about the outer perfection we seek other than by the transformation of ourselves. No help comes from the outside. The hills to which we lift our eyes are those of an inner range. It is thus to our own consciousness that we must turn to as the only reality, the only foundation on which all phenomena can be explained. We can rely absolutely on the justice of this law to give us only that which is of the nature of ourselves. To attempt to change the world before we change our concept of ourselves is to struggle against the nature of things, meaning that this is the way the universe operates. But if we attempt to change the mirror before we change ourselves, we're struggling against the harmony of the universe, which operates the other way. The universe operates in, out. So if we try to on the out, we're struggling against the whole machine that creates reality, which I don't have to tell you doesn't really end well. Neville calls it a futile readjustment of surfaces. Futile, meaning that there's no reason to do it. There's no reason to effect a change on the outside physically until you have changed on the inside. There can be no outer change until there is first an inner change. As within, so without. Neville continues, I am not advocating philosophical indifference when I suggest that we should imagine ourselves as already that which we want to be, living in a mental atmosphere of greatness, rather than using physical means and arguments to bring about the desired changes. Now, when I read this paragraph earlier, I had a little question about what he means by I am not advocating philosophical indifference. And so I searched the internet for the words philosophical indifference to try to gain a little bit better insight into what is meant, what he potentially meant by this paragraph. And I was led to a series of writings by the Stoics. And the Stoics, their philosophical indifference is that the world in and of itself is meaningless. And so therefore, the only thing to do in the mind of the Stoic is to simply accept meaninglessness with an utter neutrality, meaning that no judgment, which I think we can agree with the mystical conception of things, but there's a slightly different philosophical thread, whereas the Stoics, in my understanding of this brief reading I did of a paper by a Stoic, speaking of this idea, so it's admittedly a surface understanding. The Stoics are advocating philosophical indifference as a way of making sense of a senseless world, whereas we are advocating, mystics are advocating, this way of thinking and being advocates a type of indifference, meaning a non-judgment, because we understand that we're only judging ourselves. And so therefore we choose to accept ourselves and then choose to upgrade. The way that Neville says this is to choose to live in a mental atmosphere of greatness. Rather than using physical means and arguments to try to change other things, we choose to assume an atmosphere of greatness. I don't know that that's exactly what Neville is referring to. I'm not sure he was casting a reference to the Stoics, but that's what I found. And I thought that was interesting to kind of have a little bit of a contrast between two ways of looking at it. So I hope that's illuminating in some way. Neville continues, everything we do, unaccompanied by a change of consciousness, is but a futile readjustment of surfaces. No matter how much we toil and struggle, we can receive no more than our concepts of self affirm. To protest against anything which happens to us is to protest against the law of our own being, to protest against the nature of reality itself, and to protest against our rulership over our own destiny. To protest against anything that happens to us in our lives is to protest against being the author, because we wrote that, maybe not, line by line in the scene, but we wrote that on some level within our self-concept. Okay, so to protest against something, some sort of circumstance or situation, is to protest against the law of our own being, to protest against being the author. And naturally, the alternative way to view this is to say, okay, that happened. It's not ideal. It's maybe not what I would have chosen in full consciousness. So let me rewrite it. Okay, so this brings in Neville's idea of revision. Let me use this as an experience of contrast to get clearer about what I do want to experience. Let me reshape, right? So this is the biblical analogy of going down to the potter's house. I see him working at his wheel. He's molding his world in clay, because this world is like a clay-like or plastic-like substance. So they go down, they didn't have plastic when the Bible was written. They used clay, right? So they're molding the world according to a self-concept. And then he found that the vessel was spoiled. Oh, something happened, and that's not what I would have chosen. So what does he do? He reshapes it according to that new conception of self, right? He doesn't discard the clay, he doesn't break the pot, he simply remolds and reshapes it. And that's what we are doing. Every single moment of our lives, we are shaping and reshaping this clay that is the plastic substance of our self-concept, which is constantly being upgraded, polished, beautified, and then casting that out in harm, like the world around us is being molded in harmony with that central vessel that is our own awareness of being. The circumstances of my life are too closely related to my concept of myself not to have been formed by my own spirit from some dimensionally larger storehouse of my being. If there is pain to me in these happenings, I should look within myself for the cause, for I am moved here and there and made to live in a world that is in harmony with my concept of myself. This lesson is just full of quotable moments, and we've got another one here. This one, again, cannot be understated. If we would become as emotionally aroused over our ideas, emotionally aroused over what we do want, as we become emotionally aroused over our dislikes for what we don't want, we would ascend to the plane or level of our ideal just as easily as we now descend to the level of our hates. What Neville is conveying in this key idea here is that many times we have a habit of reacting to that which is negative more so than we react to that which is positive. And so Neville is saying that if we emotionally become aroused by what we do want at a level that crowds out our recognition of anything that is less than a level of perfection by our perception of it, if we allow ourselves to become emotionally aroused by what we want in a way that crowds out any noise of what we don't want, we would ascend to the plane of our ideal very easily. We would rise, we would ascend that spiral. And his final ideas here in this lesson, this portion of the lesson, he says, both love and hate have a magical transforming power. And we grow through their exercise into the likeness of what we contemplate. By intensity of hatred, we create in ourselves the character that we imagine in our enemies. Qualities die for want of attention. So the unlovely states might best be rubbed out by imagining beauty for ashes and joy for mourning, rather than by direct attacks on the state from which we would be free. Whatsoever things are lovely and of good report, think on these things. Allow the lovely, allow the beautiful to dominate your awareness in a way which crowds out any other ideas. For we become that with which we are in alignment. We become that which we contemplate. We become that which we are centered in with the habitual center of our energy. We become that with which we are in rapport. There is nothing to change but our concept of self. As soon as we succeed in transforming ourself, our world will dissolve and reshape itself in harmony with that which our change affirms. What I love about this lesson from Neville is that he gets right to it with a boldness. A boldness. One of Neville's lectures that I've narrated on my channel is titled Brazen Impudence. Brazen Impudence. And that term, that idea, that concept, brazen impudence, that speaks to this energy that begins to rise. Pull it up within our own being when we begin to really, as in Neville's words, toy with this idea of what if I am the cause of my reality? It's like this, well, then I can be anything that I want to be. But the thought doesn't stop there, because that thought, I can be anything I want to be, that begins to put down roots of boldness. It begins to engender courage. Because this second son, this second being within ourselves that isn't born on a human plane, but is consciousness at a higher level, a higher dimensional awareness, becoming alive within our physical human body, that second concept, which becomes over time our first concept when we really buy the pearl of great price, that comes with a boldness. It takes a boldness to assume responsibility. It takes courage to assume responsibility for your self-concept, for your world, for all that you experience. It takes courage to choose to rise above the limitations that you appear to have been born into, including the limitations of the five senses, and to choose to focus on what maybe at first only the imagination can see, and to choose to allow that to crowd out the limitations of birth, including the five senses, right? So to become so focused on what at first only the imagination can see that the evidence of the senses dims and you become dominated by this ideal. That's the title of the next lesson. Remain faithful to your ideal. Faithful in a way that crowds out all competing ideas. The noise is silenced by that clear clarion call of the ideal. And this takes a boldness, and there starts to become this brazen impudence to say, no, I am the cause. I'm going to have no ears. Remember, he says, your ears deafen to the idea that the power is outside of me. I'm reminded in this moment of the state of being that is dramatized in the Bible as King Josiah, my namesake. And King Josiah, in the story of the Bible, finds the book of the law, or finds the truth about self-concept being the cause of the world. And upon realizing this truth, sets out to destroy all false gods and idols, to return his nation, which is of course not on the outside, it's the nation of one's own being, a nation of moods, a nation of self-concepts, a nation of desires, a nation of ideals, of contemplations, of thoughts, of feelings, of emotions, of actions. That self-governed nation, King Josiah, the state that is that, sets out to root out, to pull out, to cast aside and destroy violently all illusions of external power, all false gods and idols, all illusions that would say, oh no, that person has power over me, that government has power over me, that idea has power over me. King Josiah says, no, I am casting all of that out, I'm destroying them violently, and I'm scattering their bones to the winds. They didn't even get a proper burial. He purposefully desecrated their graves because they're false gods. That's this brazen impudence. No, not shying away. It's not doing it quietly. It was this brazenness of, no, I refuse to bow before any false god or idol. I choose to only accept the truth of the power. It's the power first. And from that power gives birth to love. It's this profound self-love, because that's the only thing to do when you realize you are the power, is to choose love. And out of that love is the conception of beauty. And that's that state that Neville speaks of himself rising to when he contemplated. What if I could only see beauty? What if my self-concept were so rooted in beauty with the brazen impudence that I ignore anything that could be unlovely and I choose only to see beauty? What if that were my state? And that story that he shared from the search is a dramatic projection and vision in a mystical experience of the alignment of that state. The whole world is molded into perfection when we ourselves become aligned with a sense of boldness, with courage, with a brazen impudence, with that perfection that we find in the deep of our own being. Now, believe it or not, there's more to this lesson. It continues. There's more to this lesson of there's no one to change but self. But that's going to conclude it for today. We're going to continue with this lesson next week. I'm going to invite the members of the mastermind, anyone who has a comment or a contribution, to go ahead and I'm going to change the setting here. You can unmute yourself and offer that. And also, if you're watching on the live stream and you are not in the mastermind, I would like you to join the mastermind, please, because at the conclusion of, join the Zoom room for the mastermind. At the conclusion of this live stream, we're going to go into the mastermind session and we're going to practice doing this together through a process that I call the ascent, meaning the ascent up the spiral. We're going to choose a specific topic and we're going to ascend the spiral, meaning catch a mood, and we're going to do it together because there's this very beautiful, profound energy of collaboration when we do these things together. So if you're not in the Zoom room, go ahead and hop in the Zoom room, and we will do that immediately upon the conclusion of this live stream. At this time, I see we have Orlana. 1 second, Orlana. I want to make sure we can see you. Okay, go ahead.
Oh my gosh, this was so amazing. Okay. Okay, so I'm back.
Welcome back.
And yes, and I have several questions. I have several
Yes.
questions. So, okay, I said, okay, so my one of my questions is how do you become more Christ-like, right? But I think you answered it when you said the quote of but whenever our assumption grows so stable as a definitely expel its rivals. Like, is that the quote to become more Christ-like? Am I correct in any kind of way? Like,
Yes,
okay,
absolutely. Yes. So let's be really clear about this. So it's
yeah,
the assumption that I am a physical embodiment of the Christ mind. Okay, so
okay,
that assumption must crowd out any competing ideas about
okay,
anything else that I could be. Okay,
okay,
that's the first that because that's the rock upon which we build our whole life, right? Because that's dramatized as Peter, right? So that's the rock upon
hmm,
which we build this whole life. So that's the
okay,
first thing. The second thing I would say is to really contemplate the state that is
okay,
dramatized in the Bible as Jesus Christ. And one way to do that is to look at what Jesus does and what he says, because it's a dramatization of who we become when we
right,
really anchor our self concept into being
okay,
this fourth dimensional mind having a three-dimensional experience.
okay, okay. So, is that how you stay in the fourth dimension? That's my next question. Is that how you can stay in the fourth dimension? I
So
mean,
what I love
like,
about so what I love about this lesson in particular, what he says is he says it must become the habitual center of your energy,
right.
right? So what that insinuates or what that says is that we make it a habit. So how do you form a habit? You
Hmm.
come back to it over and over and over and over and over, right?
Okay.
Until you because Neville says he's like there's two ways. There's like we do a little adjustment and then it goes back the other way. Like we're just
Right.
like flip-flopping.
Right.
Or that's also dramatizes the story of the woman caught in adultery, right? She's like she
Yeah.
can't decide what she's going to be faithful to, right? So it's
Right.
like we can do little adjustments or we can do transformation, and that's what we're told to do. We're told to transform, and we do that with an habitual alignment. So this is literally there's a mindfulness of like constantly watching our thoughts and
Right.
saying, am I listening to my 3D mind or am I listening to the Christ mind? Like what transmission, what frequency, right?
Okay.
There's mental diets because we are told feast on what is good, what is lovely, what
Hmm.
is what is beautiful, like filling our awareness, filling our consciousness with that, contemplating beauty because we become what we contemplate. And
Right.
Jesus Christ is because it's a living state. Jesus Christ is the state that represents a complete identification with that which is lovely and beautiful.
Okay.
Jesus Christ is the magician of the beautiful.
Right. Okay. Okay. Sorry, I have another question.
Mhm. Please, yeah.
Okay. So so let me read it because I actually messaged you, emailed you. So
Yes.
I said, okay, so my question is, when you're accepting the pearl of great price, can you do different techniques? And for example, like tapping or meditation. Can you, so you can do different techniques when you're buying the pearl of great price.
So I get why you're asking that question because it's
Right,
like I have to assume profound responsibility. So am I delegating power to a technique? Like, am I
right.
assuming that the power? Okay, so I love techniques. I
Yeah.
will do techniques, but this is the key distinction. Okay,
Okay.
the power is in me.
Okay.
Power is not in the technique. The power is in me. The
Okay.
technique, it's like I am the one operating the power tool, right? Like the I'm the source of that. I am the electricity, like, and the tool I'm just using as a method or a tool, that's probably the best word for it, a tool to
Right.
shape, it's like shape the plastic substance of my awareness. I can use a tool to do
Exactly.
that, but I must assume that I am the power behind the tool. I am the reason why the tool works. The
Okay.
power is not found in the technique. The power is found in me.
Gosh. So
That's
just
the key distinction.
getting to that point of realizing that you are it. That's the key. That's the key.
That's the key. And then
Okay.
any technique is fair game, as long as you're starting from that premise that I
Okay.
am the source, I am the power, right?
Okay.
Power is within me. And the techniques are simply something that I have imagined that
Right.
assist me in some way. It's a tool.
Okay. Okay. And my last question. Okay, this is another question I emailed you. Let me just read it. Okay, so I said, I have another question. Everything is within us, correct? Right. So knowing that, do you think not fully accepting the good and the bad is a source of our own of our own suffering?
I love that.
Um, is there a way to where we can focus on the good, but when bad thoughts come, we can just let them pass in our mind without being affected by the bad thoughts? Having no judgment for the good and the bad, being neutral. And it's funny that this it mentioned neutral in this message. So yeah, so can you just elaborate more on that?
Yes. Yes. Okay. So first I want to say, Orlana, before starting the Zoom room at the very beginning,
Yes.
I answered these questions. So there's
Oh my
also,
gosh.
yeah. So there's a sec. So when you watch the recording, you'll see me answer it again. But this is fine. I love doing this, and I love doing this in a way also that YouTube can see it, because YouTube can't see, the what we do before we go live. So
Okay.
yeah. So I love this question. So
Yes.
it's can we choose this place of neutrality where there is no condemnation? Like
Yeah.
that's a biblical verse. There is no condemnation for those who are in the state
Okay.
of Jesus Christ. So no condemnation means we rise above this judgment of good and bad
Yeah.
and simply accept that everything that we see is just simply a part of the one thing that we all are.
Yes.
And then we choose to focus on what we do want, or specifically that to get very, very distinctive. The state is to focus on the beauty.
Okay.
That's the ultimate state. Jesus
Okay.
Christ, magician of the beautiful, is a way to say that. It's focused on the beauty. So it's like everything simply is, I'm choosing to see that which is lovely. I'm choosing to focus on that which is beautiful. And then as we contemplate what beauty is, as we contemplate what is lovely, we begin to shift and become what our consciousness is focused on being. And that enters that state that you're speaking of rising above, and the thoughts just simply are, but we're ceasing to be identified with them. We're entering this third place, which is above
Right.
good, bad, and is beauty and love.
Right. Right. Okay. Oh gosh, I love this stuff.
Yeah, it's so good. It's so rich. And thank
Yes,
you
yes,
for
yes.
that
Thank you
contribution.
so much. Oh my gosh. It's like I just missed like I just missed last week and I was like, gosh, I'm like, why do I have to be in LA, right?
Well, we're thrilled that you're back, Orlana. Thank you. And
Thank
thank you
you
for
so
always
much.
those beautiful contributions.
Okay, perfect.
Awesome. Paula, go ahead.
Yes, this is about the line about philosophical, was it indifference?
Yes.
Yes. Um, when I've read that, it seemed to me like what he was talking about was looking at something negative and feeling like we're powerless to change it. Like
Oh,
like you have to just find a way to suck it up and live with it, and you can't do anything about it. That's what it meant to me.
I love
So
that. I love that. That's way better than whatever the Stoics were saying.
but
Yeah,
it's really similar.
it is. It is in a
And
way. Yeah.
isn't that what being stoic is? Just like enduring in silence.
Enduring in silence. And Neville's saying that's not what we're doing here. We're not power.
Yeah, thank
Not,
God,
yeah.
because that sucks.
Yeah, it does suck to just
I've done
endure
way
and
too much of
struggle.
that stoic thing, and I don't
Brilliant illumination,
much
Paula. I
better.
really appreciate that. I love that. Yeah. Yeah. That makes me want to read that quote again. I hope you all are down for that. Let me find it. Um, I am not advocating. Let me see here. Can I find it? Advocating. Okay, this is the quote. I'm going to read it one more time. I am not advocating psychological indifference when I suggest that we should imagine ourselves as already that which we want to be, living in a mental atmosphere of greatness, rather than using physical means and arguments to bring about the desired changes. So he is illuminating through contrast. So one way would be to just like you said, Paul, like suck it up and endure. And he's saying, no, I'm actually suggesting that we should imagine ourselves to be living the way that we want to live, meaning in a mental atmosphere of greatness, rather than enduring and struggling and fighting the mirrors.
I'm thinking of something that he said somewhere else in a totally different way that I think he was saying the same thing about how imagining, what did he call it? He didn't say consolation prize, but it was something like imagining what you want isn't just a way to take your mind off what you're stuck with, like an escape. But I think he used the word consolation. I don't know.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah. So rather than like having it be like an idle fantasy, which would be like just a little adjustment. Because remember, he talked about like you can adjust and go back and forth, or you can do a transformation. And transformation where you completely change that self-concept, that what you were rooted into as a being. That's what affects change on the outside.
Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for that, Paul. That was a beautiful contribution.
Thank you.
Anyone else in the Zoom room who would like to comment or contribute? Okay, beautiful. We're going to continue this conversation, this lesson in particular, No One to Change But Self, next week, and it just keeps getting better. So we're going to roll with it. But now I see my Zoom room has filled up here with Mastermind members. We're going to go ahead and do this Mastermind session together. For all of you on YouTube, thank you for joining us live, and I look forward to continuing this discussion next week. And until then, my friends, live in a mental atmosphere of greatness. That is what is meant when we say imagine wisely. Have a great week, everyone. We will see you in the next.